our young boys. In the 22-23 financial year, the ACE, the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, received over 40,000 reports of child sexual exploitation. The AFP charged 186 offenders with 925 child exploitation-related offences. In the first 6 months of 2024 alone, the ACE received 560 reports of sextortion. These are just the reported cases. What about the thousands of cases where young men, young Australians and families were too embarrassed to report them to authorities? The AFP shut down over 1,800 bank accounts linked to offshore organisation sextortion gangs. Evidence supplied to the committee named Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, WhatsApp, Skype, Discord, Telegram, GChat, Roblox and so many other social media and digital platforms as facilitating abuse by predators. And when asked how many child sexual abuse material reports were made by Australian end users, platforms redirected their answers, proving adept at the politician's pivot. The obfuscation and opaque responses to questions from this parliament show that you cannot trust big tech to keep kids safe from sexual harm. At the same time, the use of algorithms is driving mental and physical ill health. These social media companies advertise alcohol and vapes with targeted advertising. They exacerbate eating disorders and body image issues through Fitspo and fad diets. They market gambling products, promote radicalisation and extremism, and facilitate foreign interference and anti-Semitism. We heard from the parents of eating disorder survivors and victims. We heard from recovered alcoholics and the loved ones of those who simply drank themselves to death. And we heard from our intelligence agencies about the role of social media in amplifying and enabling foreign interference and social discord. And heartbreakingly, Mr Deputy Speaker, we heard from the loved ones of those young Australians who took their own lives as a result of cyberbullying. We heard from Ali Helkic, whose son Alem tragically took his life after relentless cyberbullying by an adult perpetrator. Mr Helkic felt that had he known more about the online danger his son was facing, he would have behaved differently in how he allowed his son access to a phone and to social media. We heard from the brave mum, Emma Mason, whose daughter, Tilly Rosewarne, took her own life at just 15 years of age, following a relentless campaign of bullying which catastrophically escalated on social media. I spoke about Tilly during the course of the inquiry into social media, highlighting her case as an example of avoidable harm. And we've all heard the story of Dolly Everett. After a chilling and tormenting campaign of cyberbullying and physical violence, this promising 14-year-old student who had the world at her feet tragically took her own life. Dolly's brave parents, Tick and Kate, have since worked hard through the Do It for Dolly initiative to raise awareness around cyberbullying. After Dolly's death, I convened a meeting of the DigiGroup, the peak body for these online platforms, and I left that meeting feeling like I'd just met with Big Tobacco last century. The platforms have consistently refused to acknowledge their role in the harm perpetrated against young Australians. I promised then that I would be a thorn in their side. Since then, I've pushed for age assurance, restrictions, transparency and liability for these big tech companies. Australians can depend on one thing, and that is that the Leader of the Opposition, that this opposition, the Shadow Communications Minister, Me, the leader, the member for Flinders, and members on this side of the House will hold big tech to account. The question many have asked is, will age assurance fix these problems? Mr Deputy Speaker, be under no illusion. Australians should be under no illusion. There is no silver bullet. There is no panacea. Keeping kids safe online will require a multi-pronged approach. However, we know that age restrictions and age assurance will slow down and deter some users who would otherwise have a free pass to inappropriate content and contact. There are elected parliamentarians, corporate shills, misinformed public spokespeople who continue to spout untruths about this issue. Let me remind Australians, just because you see something on social media, even from a trusted source, doesn't mean it's true. You have been misled by vested interests at the big end of town. Age assurance is not identity assurance. It is not new. It is not a tool for parents. It is a tool for parents. It is not a substitute for parenting. When you prove your age to purchase alcohol, access a discount or enter an adult store, your data is not stored. You are age verified, not ID verified. But I want to send a huge shout out to the member for Banks, the shadow opposition Minister for Communications, who secured an incredibly important amendment to this bill, which means that any government cannot require under this bill, and nor can any social media platform under law require a user of a social media platform to provide digital ID or provide government ID in the form of a passport or a driver's licence. That will be expressly prohibited under this bill. And the member for Banks should receive a huge bouquet for securing that exemption or that amendment to this bill. In her statement to the US Congress, Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen said that social media companies want you to believe that the problems we're talking about are unsolvable. They want you to believe in false choices. They want you to believe you must choose between connecting with those you love online and your personal privacy. The age assurance trial should examine all options available to address privacy concerns and protect kids online. It is a balance which can be struck without Labor's dangerous digital ID proposals. And the member for Banks, who's just walked into the chamber, has done just that. He's secured that amendment, and he should be applauded. Despite the degree of self-interest from social media platforms that want us to think this is all too hard, from even mental health groups that have been totally self-interested, receiving financial money from social media platforms that came into the social media inquiry and saying, all too hard, nothing to see here. Unbelievable that mental health groups who purport to look after the welfare of Australians could be bought with 50 pieces of silver. Absolute disgrace. Shame on you. Frances Haugen also said, when we realised tobacco companies were hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, the government took action. We know the harm caused by social media companies as a facility for foreign interference, a platform for predators, and as an amplifier for extremism and psychological distress. It is time for government to intervene because industry has proven to be complicit. complicit in perpetrating and perpetuating harm upon our most vulnerable. As Collective Shout put so well, we cannot allow large-scale reform to be scuttled by disagreements about the technical aspects. I congratulate the Shadow Minister, I congratulate the Leader of the Opposition for their leadership on this issue, and I commend the bill to the House.
I thank the honourable member for Fisher. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Flinders.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. When I got to my feet in this place and for the first time 2 years ago, I talked about the trauma my electorate, my community and indeed my family had just come through. Between 2020 and 2022, Melbourne endured 262 days of lockdown and 36 weeks of homeschooling. And in my maiden speech here, I said, my kids' generation is intrinsically digital. Their access to information is limitless. 262 days of lockdown in Metro Melbourne embedded their generation's relationship with screens, social media and other online content. Whatever system our households had in place to balance online time with offline time in the form of study, sport, sleep and social activity collapsed during the pandemic. And worse still, the school system became the dealer of the digital drug, putting laptops and tablets into every lounge and bedroom. I said at that time, increasingly data shows us that today's adolescents, 24/7 connected to devices, addled by algorithms and autoplay, is showing signs of stress and indeed, in some cases, distress. Self-control difficulties, impulsivity, family conflict, sleep disturbance, inactivity, concentration impairment and poor language development are often observed among those whose technology use edges above the recommended few hours a day. Of highest concern is the well-documented epidemic of anxiety and depression in teenage girls, which we know correlates with high use of social media. When I gave this speech in this place in 2022, I admit there were few fellow travellers on this topic. And now there are so many. The Leader of the Opposition, who has been so clear, so determined and so persistent in relation to this issue, and my friend, the member for Fisher, who has carried his determination to see proper age verification for online gaming and pornography into age verification for social media, which we know, of course, is a means for sharing so much pornography and child sexual abuse material. And finally, in the last month, to the Prime Minister, who has met our demand to act to address the harm that social media is doing to young people. We know Australian children consume 9 hours of leisure-based screen time every day. That is the figure that the Australian Gaming and Screens Alliance will shortly publish, 9 hours a day. Based on US studies, we estimate that half of that is dedicated to social media. That should come as no surprise, because social media is designed for addiction, a feature which no one has made much of an effort to hide. Indeed, Facebook's first president, Sean Parker, said in an interview with Axios in 2017, the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post of whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you more likes and more comments. It's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. Earlier in his interview, he said, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. University professors and researchers started studying the effects of social media on our children in the early 2010s, shortly after this dopamine loop was embedded into the platforms. In their 2015 Atlantic essay, The Coddling of the American Mind, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianov started to identify the behavioural, societal and cultural changes of the generation which had grown up with a smartphone in their back pocket. Chief amongst them was an obsession with safetyism, that is, physical and emotional safety, which included safety from people who disagreed with you. And in their later book of the same name, they referred to the work by Jean Twenge, iGen, which connected safetyism to two attributes: the extension of childhood and delayed transition into adulthood, manifested in young people not getting their driver's licence or a job or a first boyfriend or girlfriend, not even drinking alcohol or having sex until well into their 20s. She also remarked an explosion in rates of depression and anxiety, which were first identified in 2012, especially for girls and young women. Jean Twenge's book iGen, published in 2017, served as the first real scientific study of the impact of technology and specifically smartphones and social media and what it was doing to young people worldwide. Now, Jean Twenge has visited Australia twice this year, the first to talk at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, where I spent a couple of hours with her talking through her work, and the second at the Social Media Summit hosted by the governments of South Australia and New South Wales last month. And at these events, she explained, psychological distress has more than doubled in young Australian women aged between 16 and 24, between 2013 and 2020, and the percentage of Australian girls who feel lonely at school has almost quadrupled between 2003 and 2022. Similarly, boys have increased markedly from around 7% to a high of 17% in 2018. In her presentation to the Social Media Summit, which you can watch on YouTube, she goes through the evidence proving that this plummet in wellbeing is directly related to social media and time online. Her data was brought to life in the hearings of the Joint Select Committee on Social Media and Australian Society, where we heard testimony of parent after parent of how their confident, sensible, sporty, popular, hard-working, balanced, wise kids had gone down the social media slide into misery as a result of scamming, sextortion, bullying, ostracism and abuse. These were not inattentive parents. They had talked to their children about social media, tried to engage schools and other parents in addressing its worst effects, but no meaningful measures were taken to address it, and these parents and the hundreds and thousands of silent parents that stand behind them, they are begging us for a solution. So the question is this bill the right solution? So let's look at what the bill does. It refers to age-restricted social media platforms being one which facilitates social interactions online between two or more users, but with scope to reduce or expand the scope through legislative rules. At a minimum, it will capture TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, Reddit, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. These services will now be obliged to take reasonable steps, not prescribed by government, to prevent persons under 16 years of age from creating or holding an account on the platform. The government has announced it will use rulemaking powers to carve out messaging services, online games and services that support the health and education of users. And while I strongly support the latter, I'm not yet convinced about the former. But in the interest of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, this is a sensible starting point, and it sends a clear message to the market that if you want to find a way to reach teenagers, you'd better find a better design for safer platforms with which to do it. Other platforms which will be exempted include Facebook Messenger Kids, WhatsApp, ReachOut's Peer Chat, Kids Helpline, My Circle, Google Classroom and YouTube. We will all need to keep a keen eye on the extent to which some of the most harmful behaviour on social media moves to these exempted platforms. And for that reason, as well as others, it is sensible for there to be a 2-year review of the whole scheme. In the Coalition's additional comments to the Joint Select Committee report released on Monday, it recommended the establishment of a Joint Standing Committee on Online Safety, Artificial Intelligence and Technology, tasked with investigating the strengths and weaknesses in Australia's regulatory framework, legislative tools, industrial base and technological capabilities. This regulation cannot be set and forget, and the advent of generative AI will create new risks. In February of this year, a 14-year-old boy took his life after forming a deep emotional attachment with an artificial intelligence chatbot created on the Character.ai website. Saul knew that the chatbot wasn't a real person. He was interacting with a large language model, but over months, that LLM had become his best friend. "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love," the chatbot called Danny wrote to Saul. "What if I told you I could come home right now?" Saul replied. He picked up his father's handgun and pulled the trigger. From here, it just gets worse. Today, this Parliament sends a big signal to big tech that it will not accept reckless damage being done to our young people. But could the bill be better? This is no doubt the case that the bill could be better. We on this side have been calling for this legislation for over 6 months, and at 5 minutes to midnight, 2 months or 3 months from an election, the government brings in a bill with great haste and expects us to improve it. But thanks to the deep industry knowledge and engagement of our Shadow Minister for Communications, we will indeed improve it, removing concerns that this is a backdoor for the ubiquitous use of digital ID, which the Coalition opposed when it came through the Parliament earlier this year. Equally, our Shadow Minister has ensured that no government-issued identification, whether that is passports or driver's licences, can be demanded. And furthermore, through that vigorous discussion, it has been confirmed that reasonable steps to ensure under 16s do not have accounts on platforms will not be targeted at 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. And do not think the platforms do not know your age. By golly, they do. TikTok admitted this year it had removed 78 million accounts for under 13-year-olds, of which 1 million were in Australia. Instagram launched Instagram Teens overnight. Mind you, they didn't mention that they were going to do that at any time during the inquiry's hearings. But overnight, it moved Australian teens who are under 16 to their Teens platform. You see, it can be done. Additional privacy measures include preventing any material used for age verification to be retained by the entity that does the verifying. Finally, I want to address what I feel has been the best argued point among those who have raised concerns about this bill, and one with which I have enormous empathy. The question of whether this bill usurps parental authority. To this point, I have received many sensible contributions, one from a constituent in my electorate of Flinders with whom I've been corresponding all weekend. I found her approach to this issue inspiring. I have edited her comments to protect her identity and for brevity, but she describes with such care the efforts she has made to protect her child from the perils of social media. She wrote to me, "One of the rules for having this phone is that she is not to join any social media groups like Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, and I have taken time to sit down with my daughter to explain my reasoning behind it. My daughter very eloquently had relayed back to me that it is not yet the time for her to access it and understands that she is not yet ready to be exposed to it. When it is the right time for her will currently be my decision. The right time for her will not be the same time as the right time for my younger son. Right now I do, however, sit with her and go through my own social media pages with her and discuss with her the elements of my feed. This has been enormously beneficial because it has shown her what she needs to look out for, the pitfalls, but also the benefits. The key is learning how to navigate it, what the pitfalls are and what to watch out for. This cannot be achieved without the conversations, without the access. Remove social media from their hands and they will get it anyway, but without the guidance from the parents, without the support, without the teachers from school teaching them how to properly navigate it, they will be on their own and will be prone to all the pitfalls. They won't have anyone to discuss this with and very unlikely will be very unlikely to seek help out of fear of getting into trouble. It is my responsibility to ready my child for this world. I have unbridled admiration for this mother, her patience, her diligence, her kind exploration of these issues, not to mention the remarkable presence of mind of her 12-year-old daughter. I recognise that parents who have made real and enduring efforts to control technology and guide the use of social media have a reason to feel frustrated with us. But this experience from my Flinders mum is the exception and far from the rule. The experience of most parents was beautifully put in a post by Heads Up Alliance, one of the many organisations, including News Corp's Let Them Be Kids and Melanie Pilling from Courier Mail, who have expressed so beautifully what parents have demanded of us. Heads Up Alliance said in a post, as a general principle, except in cases of neglect and abuse, it isn't the role of government to interfere in everyday parenting. Isn't allowing your 14-year-old access to Instagram just like any other parenting decision that families should be free to make without government interference? The question sounds fair enough, but it rests on two significant assumptions. Firstly, it assumes that parents allow their tween and early teen children on social media of their own free will. In reality, most parents have serious reservations about social media use for their children and they feel pressured to allow it too early. Case in point, a recent survey of 20,000 parents conducted by the New South Wales Government revealed that parents believe social media should only be given to children at 16.2 years of age, and yet, how many parents are able to actually follow through with that? The law won't take away parental autonomy, it would strengthen it because it aligns with what most parents already feel is right but find almost impossible to enforce. They go on. Secondly, the question assumes that social media is a healthy or at least benign activity like playing piano or basketball. It isn't. Whereas music and sport nurture growth and development, social media is inherently harmful for the vast majority of children for the vast majority of the time. It disrupts brain development, interferes with sleep patterns and negatively impacts psychological well-being. It is addictive by design, exploiting vulnerabilities in young minds, pitting them against some of the most cunning and manipulative corporations the world has ever known. That survey surveyed 21,000 people. 87% supported implementing age restrictions for social media use, but that rose to 91% when you limited respondents to parents of children aged 5 to 17. This week, today, in this place, we give parents what they have been asking for, something, anything, to strengthen their arm around the dining room table, a judgment call, a line in the sand, a clear signal that at 15 and below you do not have the mental wherewithal to resist the addictive qualities of the platforms, and that the impact of social media harms can be so great and so resistant to reversal or fix that on balance a ban until age 16 is the most reasonable option to mitigate its detrimental effects, and to help build peer and cohort support among the parent community to disconnect from social media at this most pivotal time for brain and social development. I commend this bill to the House.
Order. I thank the honourable member for Flinders. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. You know, in the 2.5 years I've been in this place, I've learned good government policy is created collaboratively, while poor policy is developed for others through a top-down approach that does not involve those who stand to be most affected. Policy developed this way is frequently a recipe for disaster, as unintended consequences swamp a good intention. And I fear that's exactly what we see in this Online Safety Act, Social Media Minimum Age Bill 2024, a piece of legislation that may be well-intentioned but ultimately fails to deliver on its promise. Rather than take my word for it, I want to share with you the words of one of my youth forum participants. He compared this ban to a mayor of a city who, in response to a high rate of car crashes, decides to simply ban cars, rather than fix the potholes, make seatbelt laws or provide more driver education. In his exact words, he said, "While that probably sounds silly, to young people like me, the government's plan to ban media for under 16 applies the same logic, doesn't fix anything, and it fails to recognise the benefits of social media for my generation." With those words ringing in my ears then, I stand today to put forward a contention that the policy that the government is moving appears to be more about quick political wins rather than doing something meaningful for our kids. They're not fixing the potholes, they're just telling our kids there won't be any cars. In pushing this legislation, the government has shown it's not prepared to listen to the voices of countless human rights groups and mental health experts who are concerned that a social media ban will not only be ineffective, but it'll be harmful to many young people. They're also indicating they do not care that this reform threatens to stop young people accessing much-needed mental health services and information and isolate them from social communities, all whilst driving them towards less regulated services. Perhaps even more gallingly, the legislation relies on the promise of an age assurance that would be unenforceable and could require all users, including adults, to share highly confidential private information with platforms. Whilst this legislation claims to be about protecting young Australians, it doesn't hold platforms to account to make their systems or their content safer for younger people. It's not just the contents of this bill that are problematic, however. My community of North Sydney are equally frustrated by the government's determination to rush this legislation through Parliament without proper scrutiny, particularly as this idea of a social media ban for under 16s was originally a thought bubble offered by the Prime Minister during a press conference where he was being peppered with criticism on why we are seeing inaction around the legislation of a ban on gambling advertising. So while this legislation was rushed into the House last Thursday, referred to a one-day Senate inquiry and will be pushed through the Senate this week, the gambling reform legislation is still nowhere to be seen. Insultingly, those who wished to make a submission to the inquiry were given just 24 hours and a 2-page limit. And despite this, media reports today suggest over 15,000 submissions were received. But with just 3 hours to hear the evidence, even if just 1% of the people who submitted were invited to give that evidence, they would have just 2 minutes to speak. That's not a proper inquiry, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a tick and flick. The whole process around this legislation is disrespectful to the community and experts in this space, and with more Australians than ever saying they do not trust our government, processes like this will not help. Trust is restored when you earn it, by enabling transparency, deliberation and due process, all ideals from which the basis of a healthy democracy stems. To the bill itself, then, this bill sets a minimum age of 16 for social media users. It defines an age-restricted social media platform as one where a significant purpose of the service is to enable online social interaction between 2 or more users, where users can link to or interact with other users, and where the service allows users to post material. The bill gives the Minister the power to create additional conditions that could narrow the definition of an age-restricted social media platform, and the government has proposed using this power to exclude services such as WhatsApp, YouTube, certain educational and mental health services and online gambling services. Yet the reasons these platforms are exempt are opaque. The bill establishes an obligation for providers to take reasonable steps to prevent under-16s from holding an account, with platforms expected to introduce systems and processes to meet that standard, while the Safety Commissioner will be given powers to obtain information about compliance, with penalties of up to $49.5 million for non-compliance. The ban will commence no sooner than 12 months from royal assent, while the government continues to fund an age assurance technologies trial. The bill aims to prohibit platforms from using information collected for age assurance from any other purpose, and finally, it will be subject to an independent review within 2 years of the ban taking effect to consider necessary changes. As a mum of 3 young adults, Deputy Speaker, I'm very aware of the negative impacts of social media and the challenges of parenting in this digital world. I also, however, recognise my children are digital natives and are very literate about how these platforms work. For this reason, I encourage everyone involved in this debate to ensure they are listening to the voices of young Australians when it comes to this decision-making process, rather than assuming that the grown-ups in the room know best. Prevention United's recent youth survey found that young Australians rated fears about the future and cost of living as the largest negative influences on their mental health, while social media was only ranked 12 out of 20 factors evaluated. For this reason, I fear we are grabbing at this as a simple answer to a challenge that is far more complicated. After all, young people understand the good and the bad of social media better than anyone. Surely the issue here is not that social media as a whole is harmful, but these tools are designed to be addictive and young people can be exposed to inappropriate content. If we want to solve that issue, then we need to do more than just impose an age ban. Ultimately, the addictive nature of social media platforms, coupled with the fact there's no regulation governing their content, means inappropriate content, harmful body images and mis and disinformation will still be dished up, whether someone accesses that platform when they're 14 or 17. We also can't ignore the fact that social media is being used by young people in positive ways, including to help them find community around shared interests or problems and fostering belonging. In fact, a recent study by the Black Dog Institute found these platforms offer adolescents opportunities to enhance well-being by strengthening existing relationships and reducing loneliness. Crucially, social media is also increasingly being used as a gateway to access mental health services and information, with research conducted by Reach Out finding that nearly half of their youth service users access their services via social media, while the same number of young people use social media as a substitute for professional support. In this context, I can understand why many from the mental health sector are alarmed by the proposed ban. The truth is the demand for these types of services already far outstrips supply, and closing an important substitute pathway could be disastrous. As the bill's own explanatory memorandum says, young people vary substantially in how they use social media. I ask them, why is the government introducing such a blunt instrument that fails to differentiate between positive or problematic uses of social media? It's difficult to see this bill as anything other than avoiding dealing with the problems of social media head-on, as it ultimately fails to hold platforms accountable for their online environments. Separately, the government has announced plans to develop a duty of care framework to keep users safe, prevent online harm and hold platforms accountable.
And thank you. The debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 43, and the member will be granted leave to resume speaking when the debate is resumed. Are there any statements by honourable members? I give the call to Member for Petrie.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I stand here today to say thanks to my electorate of Petrie. To all the men, women and children in my electorate, thank you. It's been an honour to be your federal MP once again this year in 2024, and it has been my privilege to serve our community. I want to wish every single one of you a very Merry Christmas and happy holiday season. I hope that over this period you're able to spend some time with your loved ones and your family. After all, life is about relationships, and that time spent with our family and friends is just so important. So I want to wish you well for that time and cherish those people. As we head into the final sitting weeks of 2024, I hope to see you around the electorate in the next few weeks after this. And whether it's at local Christmas carols, twilight markets, school awards, church services, at the local coffee shops or aged care centres or business visits, I look forward to seeing you all. Please come up and say good day. And I look forward to coming back here in 2025, working hard and advocating for the people of Petrie, for the people in our community and what matters most to them. I know that it's been tough over the last 2.5 years with cost of living and homelessness issues, and I'll continue to raise those issues for you here in this place. So from my family to yours and from me to you, Merry Christmas and a very happy New Year.
Member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to give a shout out to Ethan Greenfield and Hayden Supple, the JDRF ambassadors for Boothby, who are here in the gallery today, along with their parents, Kylie Greenfield and Andrew Supple. And they're here along with hundreds of ambassadors from across Australia to advocate for turning type 1 diabetes into type none for JDRF's Kids in the House. They are campaigning for ongoing support for research to find a cure for type 1 diabetes, but also for early diagnosis and intervention, so that the first time you find that your child has type 1 diabetes isn't when you're in crisis in hospital with a critically ill child. More than 130,000 Australians live with type 1 diabetes and 8 more are diagnosed every day. Just over an hour ago, I was with the Blue Army in the Great Hall to hear Minister Butler make a fantastic announcement. The Albanese government is supporting the next phase of the search for a cure for type 1 diabetes through a $50.1 million investment in the Australian Type 1 Diabetes Clinical Research Network. This investment will accelerate clinical research for prevention, treatment and a cure for type 1 diabetes. It will also establish a prevention screening pilot program to test children for early-stage type 1 diabetes before the symptoms begin. Deputy Speaker, this is a fantastic announcement and I thank Minister Butler. This will really change lives, and well done to the JDRF Blue Army.
Yeah. Member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every now and then I revert back to my accountancy days and try to get some details on numbers that the Labor Party government provide. They've given us this astonishing figure that the Inland Rail has blown out to $31 billion. So I asked for them to give me some veracity to these figures, and this is what I've got. On page 6 of this beautiful document, it says is now about $31 billion, full stop. That's about as far as we get. The next one, of course, I asked Minister Rose Jackson, who said that the Dungowan Dam had blown out to $1.1 billion, and what do we get? The same thing, a one line, 1.178. Nothing around it. These figures have all the veracity of ambit scratchings on the back of a lavatory door. They are nothing. They'll never, ever pass muster. Yet we're told to believe it, and when we ask for details, that's what we get. But it's not only the big, it's also the small. We've had $8.7 million that was going to go to the rail trail taken away. This is tens of millions of dollars in capital investment that have been revoked, and Mayor Margot Davies has brought this to our attention. The Armidale Regional Council, $5.41 billion. They're gutted by what could have gone into this tourism precinct. The Labor government has got to stop taking regional Australia as a joke. They have actually got to put their money where their mouth is and invest in this nation and invest in this infrastructure.
Member for Wills.
Deputy Speaker, today I honour the life and legacy of the late Jennifer Jacob, a relentless advocate, determined reformer and a champion for the voiceless. Jennifer was a constituent of my electorate of Wills and she served in the ADF. She passed away last month after fighting courageously against cancer, displaying her characteristic fight right to the end. Jennifer made it her life's mission to bring fairness and dignity to the most vulnerable individuals with her role as a Secretary of the Victims of Abuse and in the Australian Defence Force Association. Whether it was challenging institutions, calling on policy reforms or informing the wider community about the importance of an issue, Jennifer remained steadfast in her fight for change. She understood the power of listening and creating safe environments where victim survivors could seek refuge and strength. She was their warrior, their motivator, their confidant and their beacon of hope when hope did not seem possible. Jennifer had been a proud member of the Labor Party since 1999. She contributed to our great movement for over 25 years, most recently based at the Broadmeadows branch. Before she passed away, she passionately spoke at the Municipal Forum held for Labor Council candidates. She shared remarks about the hallmark of the party, working together as a team, not as individuals, and she called for solidarity and collective action. I will miss her passion, her energy, her advocacy, for members of the ADF, her commitment to the party, her wonderful insights, her advice, her support, and most importantly, all her friendship. And I'll make sure her battle for integrity and equality lives on in her life's work and her legacy. Vale, rest in peace, comrade.
Member for Calare.